Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Jason Kiesel on the podcast. Jason has started a few businesses, had a few successful exits, and it's a really interesting episode because we dig into kind of how he kind of transitioned from being a W-2 employee into being a startup founder, how he had to grow himself as a founder to raise some money, and ultimately had a successful exit, joined that company that actually acquired him, and had a second successful exit. And now he is semi-retired, wondering what he's going to do next. But we talk a lot about kind of the journey from being a startup founder to being actually the CEO of a business. So really fascinating episode. So let's get Jason on the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Jason, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you on, man.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I know a little bit about you because we live here in Austin, and we also are part of an angel investing group. So I know a little bit, but let's jump in and maybe give the audience a little bit of an overview of kind of who you are, where you are, and what you're up to right now, and then we'll dig into some stuff.
Sure. So Jason Kiesel, founder primarily, but now exited and pseudo-retired. I actually got my start in technology randomly enough, working at a Kinko's after college. I went to UCLA back in the mid-90s, graduated with the intent of going to medical school.
Okay.
Took the MCAT. Did everything you're supposed to do kind of to prep yourself to go to medical school. I had a degree in psychobiology. And it just was, I had some lame summer job working at a Kinko's. I worked in their computer department, helping people get online and print stuff out. It was really kind of just a mindless job.
Right.
But what I noticed was that everybody was coming in asking if Kinko's did websites. We'd get this all the time. Hey, does Kinko's do websites? I had a buddy that had been doing websites. He was a design major at UCLA, and he was kind of doing the design aspect of websites. And basically, I thought, how hard can this be? My buddy, he's doing it.
Right.
I taught him everything he knows about computers because I was like the de facto computer guy in my fraternity at UCLA. And I said, what the heck? So I went to, Barnes & Noble, grabbed a book on HTML programming, read it, just started doing it. And that's kind of how I got my start in, very basic web development and web design. From there, it just kind of, snowballed. And I eventually kind of got into back-end development, started working on the Microsoft stack when they launched the .NET framework. I think it was in 1999, maybe 2000.
Okay.
And then started working for just a number of local firms in the LA area. So I worked for Universal Music Group. I worked for Disney. I had a stint at MySpace for like 3 years.
I saw that on your background on LinkedIn. I was like, that's interesting.
That was actually kind of an amazing experience. When I joined, I think they had 10 million active users, daily active users.
Okay.
And the company was just in pure hypergrowth. And remember, like the numbers that we're talking about were big. They were actually huge for that day. Like you talk about 10 million users, it's like, what does Bieber have? 10 million followers on TikTok or whatever.
Yeah.
Like those numbers aren't big in kind of today's standard, but they were huge back then. And the founders would have a little party for every 10 million more users. And the growth got to be so quick that we'd be having these parties like every week.
Oh,
and
wow.
Finally the founders are like, okay, guys, sorry. Because
there's going to be 20 or 30
300
million
people in the company at that point. So,
right.
And we were right on 3rd Street promenades where our offices were at. So like, it was just a really fun kind of high growth environment to be a part of. And, it's just not very many folks kind of get to be a part of something like that. And it was just really fun to experience that. So, but kind of fast forward to my role as a founder is that coming out of MySpace, I wanted to create my own social network surrounding kind of local politics. And so I founded a company called Freedom Speaks, and it was just kind of your general social network. You could have friends, you could follow politicians, you could do a whole bunch of different stuff. It was all nonpartisan, like we were trying to kind of engage people and get thoughtful conversations going. But what actually happened was the iPhone came out. So I started this company 2007-ish, and the iPhone had just come out, and the App Store was booming. Everybody was trying to build apps for the store, and I thought, why don't we do something kind of in the same vein of what we're doing, but just something a little bit different. I didn't want to just rehash the website or the web app that we had created for Freedom Speaks. And so I came up with the idea of like, hey, we have this huge database of politicians. We had about 60,000 politicians in our database. Why don't we just let folks take pictures of problems around their neighborhood, upload them, and we'll send them out to their politicians so they can get fixed.
Oh, interesting.
That was the concept. It was like, hey, just report, the graffiti or the potholes or the trash on the street so that politicians could basically come clean it up. Little did I know that the politicians don't actually do that. That was, a little bit of my naivete worked in there, thinking like, oh yeah, these are the folks that actually do stuff. It's like, no, there's a whole slew of public servants sitting behind the politicians that actually do most of the hard work. But I didn't know that. So we launched regardless. We did a little bit on TechCrunch 50. I don't know if you remember that conference. I always say it's the American Idol of startups.
Yeah.
You basically get on stage, you pitch for 6 minutes, and there's a hard stop. They cut off your mic. It's kind of nerve-wracking. And then you get interviewed by some kind of industry, expert judges for 6 minutes. And at the end of the day, it was a 3-day conference. At the end of the conference, they pick a winner. I think that winner got either $50,000 or $100,000 check. There were 50 startups, and we placed third.
Oh, wow.
We were kind of a dark horse. No one had ever heard of us. Like, I didn't have a background of like, there were a lot of ex-Googlers and those sorts of guys pitching and doing interesting stuff. So we were super surprised and kind of amazed that we got third. We raised some money on that, and that's what CitySource was. So we kind of ditched the Freedom Speaks name for this app. We called it CitySourced. Kind of crowdsourcing problems in your city was the general kind of consensus for the name. Plus the domain was available. And we were able to raise a friends and family round on that, $250,000. And from there, we just kind of took off. So eventually built that business into a full-fledged service request CRM. I always liken it to Zendesk for government. So talking about customer service for government, this is what we built. And we integrated into a ton of back-end systems. I wouldn't name them because most people don't know what they are, but if you're in the industry, you would know. And then we exited. So basically, CitySource launched in September of 2009. We sold in April of 2019. So the overnight success of 10 years.
Right.
And we were basically bought by a company called Rock Solid. And they did something similar to what we did, but they weren't based in the U.S. And so the thesis for the private equity group that was running that process was, hey, we've got a great business in Puerto Rico. Let's pick up a U.S.-based business so that we can kind of cross-sell those products and services into the mainland U.S. And so we were kind of that head of the spear, if you will. And so we merged with Rock Solid. The intent was to eventually exit that business within 3 to 5 years. And so we built up that business both organically and inorganically with some M&A tuck-ins, and then eventually exited that in October of 2022. and we sold to another much larger GovTech company called Granicus.
Got it. So that kind of one idea of this Freedom Speaks kind of spawned into, this additional idea that then was purchased and then purchased again. So how did as a founder, like how do you transition or make those pivots? Like were you purposely kind of looking at, okay, this didn't work, so let's try something different? Or were some of these pivots kind of like almost forced on you by your customers and just the ecosystem that was using it? Like I'm just kind of curious how things kind of start in one direction and then end up in something completely different.
So the initial pivot from Freedom Speaks to City Sourced was actually just kind of happenstance. It was very just almost random.
Yeah.
It was me making the decision of not wanting to just rehash the same application I had built for the web for the new iPhone app that we were building. And quite frankly, it was a little bit auspicious in the sense that when we built the app, one of the guys I was working with was at a conference where the San Jose council member, he ran into him. He kind of pitched him the idea of the app, and he basically signed on the spot. So we had like a very kind of first pilot customer very, very quickly. So we got kind of feedback of like, oh, this is actually kind of a really interesting concept. It seems to have some sort of product market fit. And so that's what we did when we launched at TechCrunch. We brought actually him on stage, and he talked about the app. So he had a little 30-second bit. You can actually find the video if you search. I think you search City Sourced and TechCrunch on YouTube. You can, or the web. You can find my pitch video.
See Jason back in the day.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm a little heavier back then, even though I was a little younger. And so that was kind of the basis of that pivot. Was it's just kind of almost random.
Yeah.
In seeing almost the velocity of interest and momentum from the various, from the two distinct kind of applications. So we had the one, which was Freedom Speaks, was really meant to be kind of this grassroots activist platform.
Yeah.
And we had one customer, just wasn't really taking off. We had this thing, and maybe it was the momentum of having it on stage as well at TechCrunch that also boosted momentum. But, so that's where we shifted to, and that's where we went.
When you kind of launched officially this new City Source platform in 2009, as a founder, like how confident were you, in the trajectory, right? Like, so I think about like, as a founder, you've got a lot of responsibility. Yes, you may be a technical founder, and so you created an app, but eventually it becomes a business, right? You've got to hire, all of the other functions outside of just the tech, right? You've got to hire salespeople and, marketers and all this stuff. Like, how big did the company get to before you exited in 2019? I'm just kind of curious, and then I'm curious about your thought process or how you grew as a leader and a founder through that process, right? Because sometimes people, they're really good at the 0 to 1, but they're not really good at the 1 to 100 or whatever the metric you use. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that's fascinating.
So those are all very interesting topics too. I think let me start with kind of my growth from this journey. So, like you said, I was a technical founder. I basically coded up, all the back end. We actually hired somebody else to do the app development because I didn't know Objective-C, which was at the time the program. I think they still use it, but they also use Swift for iOS. And I didn't want to learn it, to be frank. I just was like, let somebody else do it. So we hired that out. But I think the biggest learning that I had, or kind of growth that I had as a founder, is I am very much a perfectionist. So I'm somebody that just I can't, if the spacing's wrong on a line of code, I have to fix it. And kind of going through this process, you learn very quickly that you have to let that stuff go.
Okay.
Like, perfection is the enemy of good enough, is what I always like to say. Like, nothing will ever be perfect. There's always going to be something that needs tweaking or changing or re-architecting or rewriting. Like, it's just never ending.
Yeah.
At some point, you just have to ship it.
Yeah.
You just have to be okay with maybe something isn't exactly how you want it, but you'll fix it later. Just get it out there. And that's really kind of, that is where I grew the most, is being okay with just, a 90 instead of 100.
Yeah.
Or 92. The other kind of aspect that I think I had the most growth in was in being such a perfectionist. If somebody doesn't do something the way that I wanted them to do it, I would always jump in and do it myself. So kind of that act of delegation was very, very difficult for me. But, you eventually kind of learn to do it because it's, the business is essentially going to fail, right? There's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
I can't be everything to all people. And being able to kind of understand that and get around it from my own kind of mental state was really kind of, I think, where, that was kind of the key to the success. Being able to let go of those things, like check the ego at the door, being okay with not being the expert in all things. And I think to your point, who did I hire? Who did I, look to? How many employees did we have at exit? Like, those are all, it's very interesting. So when we took the friends and family round, I think we probably snagged about 5, 6, maybe 10 or less customers with those funds. Like we built out the platform a little bit more. We tweaked the app. We built out. We listened to the customers and built out some additional features. But we really just weren't. And actually, what we were trying to do was actually get institutional money. So I did the whole VC circuit. So right after the TechCrunch 50 conference, I got meetings with Sequoia. I got meetings with, basically all the number one VC firms in the Valley. And that was basically because of the relationship with TechCrunch 50.
Okay.
So Jason Calacanis, he's like the world's greatest, angel investor. He's says he wrote the first check for Uber.
Okay.
He's been around forever. And he was one of the partners that was in charge of the TechCrunch 50 conference. It was him and Michael Arrington. They both produced it. They since split, and he runs a company now called Launch, and they do their own kind of launch conference, similar format. He has a launch incubator where he, basically advises startups and incubates startups. He has an angel syndicate, which I'm a part of.
Okay.
But through him, I was able to secure a lot of interesting conversations. But the bottom line there was that when you go to fundraise and you sell to government, at least back then, everybody was like, pass, sorry, long sales cycle, we're not interested. And it was very frustrating, right? I was seeing all these other startups raising money, getting good valuations, even with metrics not nearly as good as ours, as far as growth, et cetera. But we just couldn't land an institutional investor with all that. So we got lucky, and we were at a conference, and we got our app in front of the president and CEO of a company called Esri.
Okay.
Environmental Systems Research Institute, I think is what it's. Environmental Science Research Institute is what I think it stands for. Anyway, they're a huge software company out in Redlands. Yep. And Jack Dangermond is their founder. He's been their founder forever, since day one. And if you've ever met him, the guy is truly amazing. He's a billionaire. He's on the Forbes 400. I think Esri does almost $2 billion a year in software sales. So he's built this massive business. But when you meet this guy, it's crazy because you feel like you're the only guy in the room. He's talking to you. He's engaged. And when he came across our app on the conference floor, he basically was like, what are you guys doing? Oh my gosh, this is so interesting. He got on his hands and knees and was drawing stuff and sketching stuff out. And So we were really lucky that we just kind of happened upon him at this conference.
Yeah.
It turns out he wrote us $1 million check as a super angel, and so we basically kind of got saved from the lack of VC interest by having Jack have interest in the company. He invested. He made the investment, and he made the investment with a really interesting caveat. He said, "I'm not giving you any more money ever again." So
Okay.
he's like, whenever I invest in companies, and this is Jack speaking, he's like, I expect that company to build a good business. So if you cannot build a business that turns a profit, well, maybe it was never meant to be. But I'm not the type of investor that's just going to throw money for growth,
Yeah.
and like
The grow at all costs model.
yeah. No, he's like, you got to build a good business. So that basically forced me into a position where, like, look, if I want this business to succeed, I kind of have to take his advice to heart and, build a business.
Yeah.
And, to be fair, when we got the $1 million in the bank, we went a little bit crazy. I overhired.
Okay.
I think we peaked at 12 employees.
Okay.
Started running out of money. Went down to 3 employees. And it got to the point where, like, I was floating the company, short-term loans. I was taking no payment. My CRO, who stuck with me to the end, he didn't take payment. He didn't take salary for like 1 or 2 months. So it got pretty bad.
Yeah.
At a time there, and I think that was around 2012-ish, like mid 2012, maybe early 2013. And having circumstances or your environment force upon you certain behaviors, I think is a really interesting. You're either gonna sink or swim, and we were lucky enough to be in a spot where we had just enough growth, and we came out of it. So we hit profitability kind of late 2013, and then we just started growing organically as far as headcount. So we would really only bring somebody on if we could afford it, because we were basically living off of revenues. So we were super conscious of churn. We made sure we retained every customer. I think we had a few customers churn out, but our LTV was about like 7 or 8 years. So like we were able to keep customers for a very long time in that business. And that's part of the nature of the business. I think GovTech in general has a lower churn than, a company that sells to private industry.
Yeah. Well, the sales cycle is typically longer too, so you've got
and that's the trade-off. And I always say, like, I'd much rather have a longer sales cycle, because honestly, when you get into an enterprise sale, it doesn't matter if it's a private company or a government agency. It's going to be about 12 months. It's going to be 9 to 12, maybe even 15 months. I'd rather have the customer that's going to stick with you for 9, 10 years than the one that's maybe going to churn out after 3 or 4.
Right.
So, in retrospect, we kind of got, the right vertical correct with GovTech. We were able to weather the storm, although it was very bumpy. To be fair, I think my marriage didn't fare very well because of that. It takes its toll, but we were able to kind of come out of the other end of that and essentially grew the business to about $1.5 million in ARR. So and that's kind of where we were in early 2019. So December, January, 2019, around that time.
So there's a lot of questions I could ask coming out of what you just described, but I think we're in an environment right now where talking to other kind of investors and also entrepreneurs, raising capital is not as easy as it was in 2021, and so you obviously had a super angel that kind of laid down the gauntlet of saying, I'm not giving you any more money, you need to grow this into a profitable business. How how do you, what kind of advice would you kind of give any entrepreneur now that is in a situation where they have this idea, or whether it's brilliant or not, but they're passionate about driving the business forward, but it's not as easy to raise money? Like obviously you and some of your employees had to sacrifice, right? Not taking salaries, probably eating ramen noodles, as opposed to, filet mignon or whatever. Like, so like what kind of advice or learnings would you kind of pass on to somebody listening to this? It's like, I'm in that situation and my business is either going to die or I've got to make some hard choices.
I would say roll up your sleeves and get in and do the hard work. It's if you can bootstrap.
Yeah.
Like if you can afford it, if and again, I think this starting companies, at least from your typical startup, technology startup, perspective, I think it's a young man's game or young woman's game. It's somebody that's basically, if you're married with kids, if you've got responsibility, I mean, it will take a toll on your life. Yeah. So just be forewarned. But if you have a supportive family, if you have a support center that you can lean on and they're understanding, take the risk. Startup life is not for everybody. I always say this. It's okay to punch a clock. It's okay to just collect a paycheck. Not everybody is okay with a certain level of risk.
Yeah.
I was okay with losing it all because I knew at the end of the day, I could always just go back and be a software engineer and make 180 a year. Right. I mean, I had a skill set that is all, maybe not now with AI, but was always in demand back in the day. Right. I was a very, very good kind of A-player software engineer. So like for me, why not swing for the fences? So, that's my kind of advice there, is like, be ready for the ups and downs of startup life, because it's like, you read about a lot, Instagram, they sold for $1 billion. It was, 8 people. Right. I guarantee you, to get to Instagram, like to get to that point, they had their fair share of ups and downs. Like, I think MySpace had their, I've talked to a couple of their founders, and they had their fair share before they sold to Fox. Right. They had a bunch of ups and downs. So like, it's just, the stuff that you don't hear about is this, it's not what's reported on. I think the creators of Angry Birds built 52 games or something like that before they built Angry Birds. Right. So, I mean, well, you always see that. Like building something 52 times or 55 times and having them all fall flat. Right. And you're like, one more, guys, we can do it. Yeah. Angry Birds is the answer. You just have to have some level of positivity and confidence that, like, the next one's going to hit. Yeah. So it's a rough game. Well, everybody sees the garage photo, and then they see the exit photo of, like, whether you're ringing the bell or whatever. Like, they don't see to your point, you were a 10-year overnight success, right? Yeah. So you don't see the 10 years of sweat and blood and tears that kind of went into that. And we were a garage startup. We started in my garage in Sherman Oaks. Oh, that's funny. We have a photo of it just like everybody else. Just like Microsoft. You're exactly the same. That's awesome. Yeah. When you did exit in 2019, and, obviously I'm assuming, and maybe I should ask, like, was the acquiring company, were they bigger than you guys? Like, how did that work? Like, what was the structure? They were. So the acquiring company had just been acquired by private equity. Okay. So Stratum Capital, they're based here in Austin. Bob's their managing partner, awesome guy to work with. Super happy to have worked with him and Stratum and his team. He's very founder friendly. Okay. Which isn't the case for all private equity. They kind of have a bad rap. Yep. Just generally in the industry as being pretty ruthless, and they are, but they make money. But yep. Bob, Stratum, totally different. They had purchased Rock Solid. I think they definitely bought a majority interest in Rock Solid. So they were well capitalized, and I don't know. I think they're around 10 million in revenue. Okay. Rock Solid when they bought us, and we were 1.5 in recurring revenue. Got it. So I think that's probably where we were at the get-go. Yeah, so,
And then when you transitioned into, being acquired by Rock Solid, like obviously it was probably a very big, decision to make to actually sell, right? Because obviously you were the founder of the business, and so you have this opportunity to exit. And then when were you ready to say, yep, this is the time? We're at 1.5 million. Like, was it just like a requirement for you to sell? Like there was like just some pushing force, or like, how did you make that decision? And then what was the kind of decision to stay with Rock Solid? Was that part of your kind of agreement to be, acquired, and how did that happen?
So when Stratum came along, I actually told him no. I said, no, I'm not interested. We were profitable, so we were running a good business.
Yep.
I think we're growing 35, maybe 40% year over year. So we were probably on track to get close to 2 million in ARR, like, over the next 12 months. So we were doing very well. And in fact, just before Stratum approached us, we had gone through actually a sell process with another private equity firm. And it was a little bit eye-opening. We essentially kind of backed out at the 11th hour. What really happened was that both parties just kind of stopped moving the ball forward, so the deal just kind of fell apart on its own.
Okay.
But what really kind of changed my mind in that process, which basically turned me off to selling, was when I asked the private equity firm, I said, look, you guys, they were doing a huge roll-up. So they were doing, I think they're trying to buy 19 companies in the next 18 months, and we were number 7. We were supposed to be number 7. So during the process, I found out we were actually number 8, and number 7 was a direct competitor to us. So in my mind, I was thinking, well, they got our little software vertical buttoned up. They're definitely not going to be negotiable on price because they've kind of already got something. So we no longer have kind of that first mover advantage. And the other question I asked him was like, hey, look, you guys have bought 7 companies. Of all those companies, how many executives have you let go? Like day one. And because I was really, cognizant about my team. Yeah. I didn't want anybody to get fired. These guys had been with me for a very long time, and I wanted to make sure they were taken care of. And the answer I got back was not a good one. It was we've let go like 9 or 12. And I'm like, okay, so you basically rip out at least 1, maybe 2 on each company. Yep. As part of cost savings or what have you. And that for me was just like, no, this probably isn't a very good fit. So I cooled the jets. They subsequently cooled the jets because they had just bought one of our competitors, and basically, I don't think during that process we had been, emailing back and forth almost daily. Like it kind of just stopped, went to like almost a weekly thing. Yeah. And at some point I'm like, hey guys, I don't think this is going to work out. And they may have even lobbed that first ball and said, hey, this doesn't really seem to be a good fit. Okay. And so we went our separate ways, and I was just completely over selling the business. I was like, no, this is like, it was a super huge distraction. I mean, it's basically a full-time job. And as the primary, technical software engineer, like all feature development stopped, like a bunch of stuff kind of halted while I had to go off and entertain these offers. And when Stratum approached us, my initial thing was like, no. But Paul Malin, my VP of Biz Dev, great guy. The guy's 6'8". He's a gentle giant. The guy's just massive. Super good guy, Canadian. I think he had been with us a couple years. He said, hey, I know you don't want to do this anymore, but let me take the ball and run with this for a little bit. I said, fine. He went, talked to him, kind of got their initial, let's see what these guys are all about, etc. Yeah. And he came back to me. He's like, look, these guys seem to be kind of legit. Like they're not typical PE. At least this is what they're saying. And so I said, okay, Paul, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my list of demands. If they can, if they can agree to my list of demands, and it was a pretty onerous list of demands.
Right.
I'll sit down and chat with them. And they came back, said, yeah, we're okay. We're okay with them. Some of these are kind of an odd, list of demands, but okay, we'll agree and we'll meet.
Right.
And that was kind of the starting point. And I think to Stratum's credit and Bob's credit, he basically checked the box on every single demand and he followed through with it. So it was a very interesting, like something I was not expecting. And so I think we started due diligence in January, maybe late December. And the other thing that really turned me on to the deal was that the founder of Rock Solid, his name, Rick Brown, he and I had very similar kind of origin stories, software engineer, built a company, kind of technical founder, built it up, etc. Hadn't really taken that much money, if any at all. He was a technical founder, so he coded ERP systems back in the day. So we really hit it off.
Yeah.
And when we met for the first time in LA, I think it was in early January, that really kind of got the ball rolling. So it was, and I don't know how we got on this topic, but that's how that process took place. It went from having a really kind of, sour taste in your mouth from one process to basically saying, look, if you'll do this laundry list of things for me, I'll meet with you, to them being, yeah, we'll do those. And meeting the other founder, just getting along with everybody, getting some assurances and whatnot. And like the rest is kind of history. So,
well, the benefit was you had the luxury of having the ability to say no, right? Like you didn't have to sell, like a lot of companies, it's like sell or die kind of thing. And so you had a profitable business. And so you were like, hey, I'll throw all of these very difficult things for you to achieve. And if you say they're good, then I have to take the meeting because it's very interesting. So, so obviously it was a hard decision to kind of go through the sale process. And then obviously you joined Rock Solid, and now you are self-described as pseudo-retired. How did you, make that decision to be like, okay, I'm ready to exit again, and then, have a little bit of a, I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, right? Like it's just a different feeling to, exit a business and go into another business, and then exit that business, and then you kind of wake up the next morning and you don't have a job to go to technically. So
full disclosure, when I exited the first time in 2019, when we sold City Source to Rock Solid, as part of that deal, I only took 25% of my comp as cash.
Okay.
The remaining 75% I rolled over into stock in the new business.
Got it.
And Stratum was very upfront and clear. They said, hey, look, we love what you guys are doing. We think there's an opportunity to, put you guys, put you and Rock Solid together, do some tuck-ins, grow the business organically, and then exit again for 3 to 4x in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm down with that. I'm down with that plan. Let's do that.
Yep.
So I, having rolled over as much as I did into the new business, I was now the third largest shareholder.
Okay.
I had significant skin in the game. It was basically Stratum, Rick, and me. Like we were, and then I think Rick had his top guy was just under me, and some of my guys were just under them. So we were all pretty aligned on getting this business to a point where it would be attractive to another either strategic or financial sponsor at some point. So everything we did was kind of based around that. It was grow. So like, what can we do to grow sales? Are there any interesting companies that we can get to? And so that was kind of the mandate moving forward. So,
and then when you, I guess, did exit the second time when Rock Solid exited, then you kind of had that retirement moment where that other 75% was, realized, and hopefully it was more than what you would have taken back in 19. But like, how did that feel when you exited and you're like, okay, now I don't have a job to go to. Now I do have the ability to wake up every morning, and then I want to pivot into some of the angel stuff that you've been doing. So how did that kind of second exit, if you will, of Rock Solid kind of feel?
So it's very interesting. You go from 100 miles an hour to basically 3 miles an hour.
Okay.
Right. You go from a full calendar, meetings, be it executive or product or whatever, all day, every day, to essentially nothing. When we got purchased by Granicus, I was not contacted by anybody as part of the integration team for at least a month. So like there was a period where, and my role at the time of exit was M&A. So I did corp dev, I did mergers and acquisitions, I sourced companies that we could potentially buy, did due diligence, etc. Now that we were purchased, I can't do that anymore.
Right.
It's not like I can go buy another company. I don't even have the authority to do that.
Yeah.
So I was basically kind of stuck in this limbo where I'd show up for the exec meetings and, I'd clock in, but I wasn't really doing anything. So
yeah,
it didn't take them long to kind of figure that out. So I was there. Ironically, I was the first one kind of jettisoned off the executive team. So I was packaged out in November. We were sold in October. I got packaged out in November. And now I'm basically stuck with nothing, right? I got no meetings,
right?
No anything. I've got a decent amount of cash in the bank, from the exit, but like nothing to do. I don't play golf. I surf, but now I live in Texas, so I can't surf. Right. It's too hot to play beach volleyball.
Right.
So what do you do? It's like, well, especially with somebody that has worked all of their life. I've worked since I was 10 years old. I had my own I sold oranges. I picked oranges out of our backyard. I packaged them up. My dad drove me to the local, breakfast diner, and I sold them for 10 cents a pound. Like, I've been doing something all of my life.
Yeah.
And to simply just not have anything to do, it's weird. It's weird. It is just odd. And I very kind of quickly got bored. My wife likes to say, I would just spend all day trolling people on Twitter. And even that gets boring after a while.
Right.
So, you try to find stuff to do, but at the end of the day, like, I'm basically now doing some angel investing, so kind of looking at other companies. I do some advising with startups, but I really like to kind of do my own thing again, and so I'm working on a couple different things in that regard.
So you took a few years off, had a little bit of a gap, and now the entrepreneurial bug is starting to get you again, and so you're trying to think of other things to do. As we kind of wind this thing down, I've taken a lot of your time, so I appreciate it. The angel investing side, obviously, that's where you and I met almost a year and a half ago, I think, at this point. And when you look at deals, when you hear founders kind of pitch, because obviously you had to pitch your business back in the day. What do you, other than the product or the service or whatever the thing is, what are you thinking of or looking for in founders that are pitching, their products, whether it's SaaS or med tech or whatever the case is be? Are there a few things that you kind of look for in the person to kind of say that I would probably bet on the horse versus kind of the product or service or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely characteristics you can look at in a founder. I think the biggest indicator of success for anybody, especially when it comes to being a founder, either in software or anything, is what I would call grit. So your ability to persevere when there is an incredible amount of kind of negative pressures being put on you. So, competition, hiring, just, sales, whatever it is, like, you need to be able to push through that. if your business is going to succeed.
Yeah.
So to me, that is a huge characteristic, and you can kind of see that a little bit if you look at somebody's like LinkedIn. If they're jumping around from job to job to job like every few months, it's like either they're getting bored really quickly, or like there's just something there. So that's probably a red flag that shows up.
Yeah.
Taking initiative. So I went ahead and built this in my spare time and published an app or did this, and I got my first customer and now I'm committing, so those sorts of things are all kind of good green lights. Those are kind of the things that I look for in an individual. Like as far as companies go, I want to see a big TAM. If there's a big addressable market, that has to exist, right? If you're selling to some subset of some subset of some subset, and that's your core market, it's just not big enough. It'll be a great business if you penetrate that market, but if you really want to build a big, successful business, and I'm talking, tens of millions in revenue, ideally hundreds of millions in revenue,
right?
The market just needs to be big.
Yeah.
And as an angel investor, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking to invest in something that's just going to, exit
lifestyle business
for $5 million, right?
Yeah.
I want to see an 8-figure or more exit if I'm early.
Right.
So those are the kind of primary things, and then just generally it's is the product good? What's the general sense that you get from the team? Are their customers happy? There's just basic things that you can look at to kind of understand this, they're on the right track. And, it's always a risk though. I mean, angel investing is a huge risk.
Yeah. That's why you need to build a massive portfolio, and hopefully one will be the unicorn, and the others, your odds are that, if you invest in 10, what is the odds? 6 or 7 are going to go to 0, and maybe 2 will be okay. And then hopefully 1 will be the one that makes it all worth it. Right.
Yeah.
So you got to take a portfolio approach to it. We'll probably have to have you back on, because we still have to talk about whiskey and then of the other stuff that you're working on. So we'll save that for the next conversation. But before we wrap up here, I've got a 3-pack of questions that I ask every guest. So first one is just, what's your favorite business book?
Crossing the Chasm. I believe I would say it's a software technology sales book, but it's got an interesting theory on how software sales kind of develop over the lifetime of that business. So it's super interesting to kind of look at and understand, and I think it holds true for a lot of kind of innovative startups, which is what CitySource was. I mean, we were doing basically mobile at the very beginning. So imagine trying to sell a mobile app to a city government in 2009.
Yeah. When the iPhone just came out, and there's all the security and all that stuff. Yeah. Got it. No, it's good. I hadn't heard of that one. I'll have to check that one out. I hadn't
Crossing
heard of
the Chasm.
Yeah. All right. Second question. I may know this, but what is one of your favorite things to do outside of work, or now that you're in kind of retirement, kind of in your spare time?
There's a couple things. Fly fishing is one. Fishing in general, but fly fishing, I'm going actually on a trip this next week. I leave Sunday for Montana.
Okay.
Eating out, so my wife and I are big foodies, so we love to kind of check out all the new places, everywhere. LA, Austin, New York. So we enjoy traveling, obviously. And the one about, of course, is I have a pretty big passion for whiskey and spirits in general. So I collect. I've got bottles in the hundreds. I think my collection's at around 650, maybe 700 bottles. So I'm not an alcoholic. If you look at the bottles, they're there's tiny little neck pours just on each of them. So I just like to try them. Share them with friends, that sort of thing. I like to host, whiskey tastings with buddies and stuff like that. So,
Well, I've been the beneficiary of a few of those tastings, and so I appreciate your massive whiskey collection.
I love to share, so
yeah.
hit me up.
Awesome. Well, last question here. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Oh, jeez. So if it's a tropical spot, I'm gonna pick Maui.
Okay.
I just and specifically, it's the hotel's not super updated, but it's a fantastic location. It's called the Sheraton Black Rock. It's on Kaanapali Beach in Maui.
Okay.
Probably the best snorkeling on the island. So I would say for tropical, definitely there. Europe, I love Paris, but to be fair, I haven't really been in much anywhere else, but
okay.
I do love Paris. If I'm, I'd say Martha's Vineyard is probably one of my favorite spots to go during the summer. It's just like
okay.
quintessential Americana. If you think of like the beaches, all the streets are lined with American flags, and it's like white picket fences. It's just, everything's kind of Cape Cod style
right.
houses. It's just a nice vibe to kind of relax and chill. So, and they've got great food and, great things to do. So my wife and I like to go there every year.
Awesome. Jason, really appreciate you coming on. If people want to reach out and just kind of get to know you a little bit more, maybe ask some questions, if they're a founder or a startup and want to get like your opinion, because obviously it sounds like you do some advising, like what's the best way to kind of connect with you?
So I have a website, jasonkiesel.com. My handle on pretty much every social is Jason Kiesel. So on X, Twitter, on Instagram. I don't really use Facebook anymore. On LinkedIn, it's Jason. So, but if you go to jasonkiesel.com, I think all my socials are linked there.
Got it.
And you can just hit me up with a DM on one of those things.
Awesome. Well, we will make sure that is in the show notes. So, Jason, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.